Hi Dan, hope you're doing well.
Good morning.
Very good morning. How is the day in Israel?
Just beginning, just beginning, but I hope we're going into 2025 here with hopefully a bit of optimism after an incredibly tough 2024 slash end of 2023. And I hope with developments in the region, I hope with new world leaders coming into office, I hope things are looking better for our part of the world. How about
Dan, you
you?
know that I'm good, thank you. And do you know that you are a very famous person in Pakistan? At least the Sharaka NGO is very famous in Pakistan.
I hope only for good reasons.
I doubt. I doubt. Because there are so many conspiracies are there with the Sharaka and the initiative you are doing and you are pursuing. And you shattered the political scene a few years back when the Prime Minister of Pakistan spoke about a delegation whom Sharaka invited to visit Israel from Pakistan, or that Pakistani delegation had a journalist from Pakistan.
Yes.
So it was something very new for Pakistanis. So how did this whole thing started, like Sharaka? I know about Abrahamic Accord, but I want to listen from you how the concept of Sharaka started and how your activism started.
Sure. Look, um, I'm now in my early 40s. I'm a child of. I grew up during the Oslo peace era. And if your listeners are not aware, we're talking about the 1990s and especially into the early 2000s when we believed and truly hoped that there would be imminent within our lifetimes peace, a two-state solution with the Palestinians, and a quick end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This was all in the days of pre-social media, so I don't think we realized how much hate there is towards us around the world. And so I grew up with a dream that we would have peace with our neighbors. I studied at universities in the West, in the United States, in Middle East studies and Islamic studies and in Arabic studies. And many of my friends at the time were from all over different parts of the Arab world, of the Muslim world. My family comes from the Arab world. And I had envisioned, maybe naively, at one day that as the child of Jews who immigrated to Israel from the Arab world, I would be, and it's not a special story. Most of us Israelis, I'd say more than half of us Israelis, have parents, grandparents, or great grandparents who came from somewhere in the broader Arab world or the Muslim world. And I thought we'd be there and we would have peace and we would finally have, instead of sending our kids to the military, we'd be able to focus on culture and technology and business. I was very wrong. I was very wrong. And when the Abraham Accords were announced, I was so unbelievably excited and curious about the possibilities. Like most of my Israeli friends, on the left and the right, Jewish and Arab, and many of us rushed out to, at the time, Dubai, to try to connect with the Arab world in ways that we couldn't imagine even just a month before. And a lot of relationships were built, a lot of friendships were built with friends in the UAE, Emiratis, and people from other parts of the region, including from Pakistan, including from Saudi, including from Syria, including Palestinians and Turks and Moroccans, and you name it. And an initiative was formed, not by myself. An initiative was formed called Sharaka, that sought to promote these accords. It sought to try to connect on the what we call the people to people level. So not government and not business either. And I had the very good fortune of joining that endeavor, and then very soon after becoming its executive director of that initiative. And the goal was ambitious. It was to be the catalyst, the group that is connecting to people, bringing them together, bringing people from around the region to Israel, bringing Israelis to visit the new peace countries, promoting this new concept around the world. And pretty soon we turned into a bit of a movement of people who want to connect outside of politics. We don't push any kind of political narrative in Sharaka, and we want people to be able to engage on that person to person level. Um, so that's how the whole thing started. Initially with the Gulf countries and expanding to Morocco. And the delegation you speak of was actually, it was funny. It was part of an attempt and an effort to connect with Americans who are Muslim, most of them of Pakistani descent. And in that delegation, there happened to be the Pakistani journalist that you spoke of, and we saw an opportunity. We sensed there was curiosity, and we said we're certainly always happy to bring any open-minded, curious person to Israel to explore, to see for themselves, to learn for themselves. And I guess that's how the whole Pakistan chapter of what we do began.
That's very interesting. So one thing is for sure that Sharaka is an Israeli initiative, but it is not an initiative of Israeli government, right?
Correct. It's first of all, it's not just an Israeli initiative. So Sharaka, first of all, was and at its core is a joint initiative between Arabs from around the region and Israel. And so the original founding of Sharaka was an Israeli, an Emirati, and a Bahraini. At its core team, you have Khaliji, Gulf Arabs, and Moroccans, and Israelis, all managing the senior team together, all setting the vision and the strategy together. And as we grow, we hope senior people from different Muslim countries will join that team. To your next question, no, it's not a governmental initiative. It's 100% a private initiative. Something that I think people often don't realize about Israel is how much it's a country that is, first of all, it's a democratic country. And we don't just say that as lip service. We mean the government really doesn't control our lives here. We live our lives. We have an immense amount of freedom to do what we want. And sometimes those things are completely in the civil space. Sometimes it's things that the government likes. What we do, the government likes, and so we get a lot of government cooperation. But it's also things the government doesn't like, and the NGO sector with non-governmental organizations who are extremely critical of the government is also very rich here. And they might not get government cooperation, but legally they fully operate. And lastly, so our friends in the region don't always comprehend what it means to live in a society where you can literally do whatever you want as long as you're not breaking the law. But I think the deeper aspect of Israeli society and what makes it unique, even in the West, is that we're a society that is absolutely driven by civil society initiatives. And so the government is quite slow here in many cases. And when people want to see a change made, whether it's in handicap rights or legal initiatives or media initiatives or public diplomacy initiatives like ourselves, we make that change happen. And oftentimes, if the government likes that, then again, they can cooperate with it or not cooperate with it. But a lot of the change you'll see made in Israeli society on all levels is civil society change.
That's right. That's right, and that's very interesting. Uh, First of all, realizing that Israel is a state is very interesting because people think that somehow it's not a state. It's like a doll's house. So every single day there are so many demands to eliminate that doll's house
Yeah,
from the surface of Earth, and
yeah,
that's and I can realize that when it's make a serious security challenge for the residents of a whole existing country. And this is what we have witnessed on October 7th. And accept my condolences for that and my condemnation for the act of terrorism which happened on October 7th.
Thank you. It means a lot, and I know you're quite a brave individual to make such public statements. We received many private statements of condemnation for Hamas and support for us. But to make such public statements as you did and as you're doing now is something we don't take for granted here. It should be obvious, but it's not. No, we're a real country. We're a real country, as old as 50 other countries in the world. An incredibly developed country. We've now just passed the 10 million mark of citizens. I know that seems small in your part of the world, where 10 million is not a large country. Um, but incredibly deep institutions and incredibly developed economy. We're now at I believe we're somewhere at the $50,000 a year GDP per capita. We're talking about a close to a $500 billion a year economy. The second biggest economy in the region, I believe, here in the Middle East, and one that's almost entirely not based on oil or gas. We have, as we've shown, unfortunately, we've had to use it, easily the most powerful military in the region. And it's an incredibly diverse country. It's an incredibly um, real country with real people and real problems and real issues and real identities. And so, anyone who has a chance to visit, I certainly encourage them to do so and see that for themselves. And anyone who doesn't have a chance to visit, I encourage them to watch Israeli or maybe less biased documentaries about Israel or even Israeli television, and try to get a sense of who we are as a people and as a country.
Thank you for the invitation to my fellow countrymen to visit your country. And by the way, on a lighter note, every second journalist in Islamabad, when I meet them, they say that, oh, yes, we got an invitation from Sharaka to visit Israel.
Yeah, we've had the good fortune of being able to facilitate a decent amount of journalist delegations here, especially since October 7th. And
Hmm.
so, if there are well-known journalists who are listening, people with good platforms, we certainly would be happy to host them, and they can share their experiences on their own without us saying or spoon-feeding any information.
That's great. That's great. So then I want to ask you that how challenging is being a Jewish facing the anti-Semitism sometimes, and being Israeli facing the political heat, and when sometimes someone questions on your existence, and sometimes someone questions on the future of your coming generations. They are not talking only about eliminating a country, it's a whole country of 10 million people. Their livelihood, their families, their kids, their dreams, their investment of generations and generations. Like people used to evacuate or flee from the area where the conflict is. The only community is Jewish community who is for decades uh, coming to the area where the conflict is, and they are migrating to the area where the conflict is. So a brave community, a dedicated one.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if it's something that other peoples, other ethnicities, other religious groups, other nationalities can even begin to comprehend. Maybe I'm sure there are other persecuted groups in the world, but the hatred against Jews, or what's called in English anti-Semitism, which I hate that word. It's a word that was defined and coined by anti-Semites, by Jew haters, in Germany in the 1800s, actually. At the time, the only Semites that they were referring to in Europe at the time were the Jews of Europe, who used to constitute quite a large minority group in Europe prior to the Holocaust. Um, but there's such a deep element to it, and this is something I've been wrestling with really my whole career, but especially since October 7th. It's not the same as hate towards other groups. And so, for example, people in the West like to throw around the term Islamophobia, and it's quite different. Or if you talk about prejudice toward Black people in America, or you can talk about the animosity between Pakistanis and Indians, or Bengalis, or what have you in your part of the world. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the nuances. Um, it's quite different, because only in the case of anti-Semitism, of hatred against the Jews, is it really not connected to anything the Jews are doing or can change. And it's not connected to necessarily the Jews around them. And so the people that really hate the Jews the most are the ones that actually don't know them. And the Jews, and today Israel, unfortunately, has become the collective Jew on the world stage. And we see that post October 7th, they're no longer just saying the Zionists. They're saying Jews. When you're attacking a synagogue in Canada or in Australia or in France, you're not attacking Israel. You're attacking Jews. And it's they have this mythical concept of what Jews are and what they do and what they don't do, or what Israel is and does, it has just very little to do with who we actually are. And so it pains us, because throughout history, the Jews originated from Judea. Judea is the historic name for this land, or technically for parts of this land. Um, or Israel, the children of Israel. That's what we call ourselves. And we've lived basically in a state of expulsion from when the Romans banished the Jews from this land 2,000 years ago, and until 1948, the Jews lived in a constant state of expulsion. And so everywhere the Jews went, they would form diaspora communities, and they would try to assimilate, they would try to contribute, they would try to be part of the society. And throughout history, there would always be hatred against the Jews for what they were or what they weren't. And so the classic examples of in Christian Europe, or in the Muslim Middle East, if the Jew wasn't Christian or Muslim, they were hated for their religion. When the Jew tried to assimilate culturally, they were hated for trying to assimilate. When the Nazis brought about racial ideologies, it wasn't enough that the Jew had culturally assimilated to Europe at the time. It was now a racial thing. The Jew was a Semite. The Jew was a different race, a much lower race that needed to be exterminated. And there was always, capitalists went after the communist Jews, and communists went after the capitalist Jews. And so, no matter what the Jew does, we can't catch a break.
mm,
And we feel collectively that if people could just sit with us
mm,
and just ask their questions, or bring up their crazy, the people love to say Jews control the banks. Uh,
mm,
you know, uh, you can see I live in quite an old building in the middle of central Israel. I
mm.
work morning till night, just trying to pay mortgage and have a decent life, a middle class life for my family. Many Jews here in Israel are quite poor and
While
live
controlling
around
the
the clock.
banks, right?
Sorry?
While controlling the banks.
I said if we're controlling the banks, we're doing a pretty bad job of it then. Or they like to say Jews control the media. I think we're taking quite a hit on the media. And if we're controlling the media, I think we should be doing a much better job of it. I'm not seeing the benefits of the Jews controlling the banks and the media. Um, all of these crazy things. Again, I go online, unfortunately, too often, and I see these crazy accusations made about us. And it's just talk to us. Just find somebody, talk to them, go visit Israel, go visit large Jewish communities. And people are so shockingly uncurious. And they come with this set of malice, and it has deep roots. Christian anti Semitism, whether people ascribe it to Christianity or not, has 2,000 years of history. Muslim anti Semitism, whether people ascribe it to something deep in the schism when Islam broke away from Judaism. Essentially, all monotheistic religions broke away from Judaism at some point or another. These have deep roots, 1,300 years of animosity. You know, I think, by the way, there's a reason why you don't see deep anti-Semitism in the not monotheistic part of the world. So if you go into India and China and Japan and kind of Buddhist areas and Hindu areas, and you don't see anti-Semitism there, I think there's a reason. I think there's a big brother, little brother syndrome that we need to solve. And I think, and I applaud people like you for actively trying to solve these issues. Um, so it pains us. It pains us that people ascribe all of these things to us. They attack us. They do everything but talk to us. They do everything but look for the truth, and they look for little tiny pieces of something that verify their conspiracy and their hate, rather than looking for the actual truth, which they'll find everything but their hate, right? And it pains us. And it pains us that Jews in the world are not safe. It pains us that every single Jew, Israeli or not Israeli, thinks twice about using their real name or saying or telling someone in the world where they're from. I don't know if Pakistanis have to do that, right? If a Pakistani's traveling in wherever, they don't have to say, should I say I'm Pakistani or not? We have to think
No, even
twice.
if they
Am I in
if
a
they
situation
see
where I could get?
if a Pakistani if a Pakistani while traveling meets a Indian, he brings his passport immediately out. Look, I'm Pakistani. So
Yeah, we have to think twice about that, and sometimes I do it just to mess with people. I don't know if your viewers can see. I'm not a small person, and so I'm usually not afraid if someone's going to try to attack me. But if it's a large group, or if maybe you'll get harassed at a restaurant, or your family will get harassed at a hotel, you have to think twice, and people don't understand. Um, what that's like, and it's quite sad that we're paying for the imaginary sins of this imaginary villain in people's heads, is essentially what it is.
and this is not only that you are paying now, you are paying for ages and ages. Like Holocaust took place,
Unfortunately, yeah.
and people,
And the way people work and the way the media work is we don't see our allies, and we have many allies and we have many friends, and there are many sensible, normal people who are not filled with hatred around the world. But they're not the ones we see online, and they're not the ones we see in the news, and they're not the ones who are, you know, um, involved in this discourse. So we see only the masses of people who hate out of ignorance, and yeah, it's not easy. We feel very much alone, oftentimes.
and this is a surprise to me that while having these all reactions and feelings, still working positive, still working towards positivity is something which needs a huge courage. And I appreciate that. Not only to you, but I have met many Jews. I have many friends in Jewish community. I have found them all very positive. I have found them all very positive, and this is something which inspires me a lot.
I appreciate you saying that. I think we have something deeply ingrained in our Jewish heritage and culture, and whether this comes from the Torah, this comes from our holy book, and that is to make the world a better place. Um, we are generally a positive people. We're a people that wherever we go, whether we're religious or secular, or traditional or liberal, the Jewish impulse is to improve our surroundings, to improve first of all our own family situation, We're not a people that our culture is not to dwell on hatreds. Our culture is to move on. And maybe because we've had so many times in our history where we've suffered some kind of persecution or another and had to move or flee or were expelled, um, you can't go around carrying hatreds in your hearts. And our impulse is to build. Our impulse is to improve. I think it's no coincidence that you see so many of the top minds and authors and thinkers and inventors and scientists in the world um, are Jewish, whether they're practicing Jews or not practicing Jews. Um, I think, if you come to Israel, one of the beautiful things you see here is how much there's a society of people who are either through social initiatives, volunteer initiatives, or medical initiatives, um, or technologies. It's just, or agriculture or water initiatives. It's just, how do we make people's lives better? And that's something I think that's always been remarkable. You go to any Jewish community around the world, you see a charity mechanism, and you see social justice mechanisms. By the way, that's one of the tragic things about Jews in the United States. The Jews in the United States make up today the second largest Jewish community in the world, or the first, depending on how you count, how you identify who's a Jew and who's not a Jew. And the Jews in the United States have traditionally leaned progressive, politically progressive. And it came out of an impulse that, as a historically persecuted people who finally found refuge in America, they owe it to society and to other persecuted minorities, but also to themselves, to make sure that no minority is persecuted, that there is inclusion, that there is a social welfare. And that's why they've traditionally sided with Democrats. And what's ironic is to see that those very mechanisms of politics in America have been weaponized against the Jews. And the Jews are today at a huge um, question mark of their place in American society, because they said we have always been at the forefront of defending persecuted minorities, and now the left is turning against the Jews in America. But they don't feel at home in the right, in the Republicans, and so there's a big question mark. There's a big upheaval about the place of Jews in American society today, and it's quite ironic. But that impulse to heal society, to fix society, to make the world better, whether through business or through social initiatives or through medicine or through literature, I think is something truly unique to the Jewish people, and I hope you know I hope people can see that around the world. They don't always see it.
So I can really understand and realize the situation with the Jewish community and especially people inside Israel, how challenging it's being Israel, or we can face the heat when we try to be supportive to the narrative of rationale. So we can realize. Uh, I want to ask something about Sharaka. As you explained us how it was
Mm.
founded, I was going through its board of directors. You don't have much from the Muslim world. There is one from UAE, and perhaps in your team there is few from Bahrain and Morocco, right? So how
And some
Sharaka?
American Muslims also.
Yeah, yeah. So how Sharaka receives the response from Muslim communities?
Sure. First of all, I'm not sure the website is up to date. I have to check. A lot of this is changing. Unfortunately, a lot of people who were and still are involved in it felt a lot of pressure after October 7th and asked to have their names removed from the website, and still being involved with the initiative. but people felt pressure in their communities, whether in UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, um, but they asked to have their names removed. American Muslims were still there, but I'm not. First of all, I'm not exactly sure the website's up to date, to be honest. But yeah, we've so there's no one answer for such a question. There's a lot of curiosity and a lot of openness all over the world to engage, generally and broadly speaking, with this issue of engaging with Israel, or working against anti-Semitism, or people who are interested in combating and taking on radical Islamism within their own communities, or in the region. And then there's the second question of specifically with an organization. Um, in the Gulf countries, for example, there I find many people are supportive of Israel. Now, I want to say people always rush to hear supportive of Israel or supportive of Palestine as something binary. That means if you're supportive of Israel, that means you have to be anti-Palestine, or if you're supportive of Palestine, you have to be anti-Israel. And something that we're trying to bring to the discourse is that's not the case. If you support Israel, that doesn't mean you hate Palestine or you're against Palestine, and vice versa. Um, if anything, what we're trying to bring about is, if you actually care about the Palestinians, you should be pro-Israel. And being pro-Israel doesn't mean you're anti-Palestinian. Um, if you actually care about the good of the people, you'll be anti-Hamas. If you care about the good of the Lebanese, you'll be anti-Hezbollah. If you care about the good of the Syrians, and now the world sees that, you'll be anti-Assad. And of course, the Iranian regime is behind so many of the region's troubles. Um, so we're trying to bring together people. We see a lot of interest, but there are many countries where the governments say, you know what, this is not the time to engage in such activity. Um, in another case, however, in Morocco, which is our largest growing chapter, we'll call it, and there's a lot of public sentiment that's against what we're doing. There's also a lot of public sentiment in favor, and people are lining up to come on trips and to come engage and to come learn. We've had people from Pakistan, actually, even since October 7th, come to Israel, journalists especially. We've had Pakistani and Afghani senior journalists come and learn and engage. Um, and we're finding interest in new communities, whether they live in those countries, which is more difficult these days, or they're expats. And so sometimes they're willing to be open about it, and sometimes they want to keep it more quiet. A lot of people are happy to come and engage and learn. They just don't want their face on a website because they'll be targeted for either violence or social pressure. But we see actually a lot of growing interest in exploring peace with Israel. There's this delusion of again, being pro-Palestinian means you have to be so anti-Israel and you have to attack Israel and you want to destroy Israel. So first, you're not going to destroy Israel. Secondly, if that's your approach, you're not going to help the Palestinians, uh, and you're going to make you're just going to keep creating a state of constant conflict. You're part of the problem. The only way to solve this is to convince those in Palestinian society to get along with Israel, to live peacefully alongside Israel, to change their mindset. Because until you do, you're going to fuel a conflict that they can't win. They're not going to win. They're not going to defeat Israel. Israel's not going anywhere. We talked about that. And so if you're feeding this delusion, they've had this delusion for too long, and Hamas is the par excellence this delusion that they need to constantly fight Israel, the resistance, the resistance, the resistance. What are you fighting against? Israel left Gaza in 2005. Israel left Gaza. and they launched a war from Gaza against Israel. This is why they're unfortunately they're paying this price now. And the world feeds into their delusion that if they just keep resistance, then they'll one day defeat Israel and Israel will leave. I don't know where they think we're going to go. And the best thing to do is the Abraham Accords approach that says, guys, Israel's not going anywhere, the Palestinians aren't going anywhere, we all need to live together peacefully. And the region, the world needs to keep strengthening that message as opposed to strengthening the yes, resistance, and we're going to back you and keep fighting Israel, and we're going to boycott Israel, and we're going to attack Jews. That's not going to solve any issues. That's just going to create a worse issue for everybody, including and especially and first and foremost the Palestinians. And so, if the world wants to help, it's by changing this message, changing the mindset and saying, Israel, we're with you. Palestinian people, if you're peaceful, we're with you. Extremists on both sides, get out of the way. And let's let the adults talk finally. Um, a lot of our goals depend on political realities that, of course, are beyond our control. But our vision, as we always like to put it, is that in places where the political conditions are ripe for peace, we want to be the leading NGO, the leading non-state actor that's promoting that peace and trying to deepen it. So if 10% of a population is pro-peace, we want obviously 100%. But realistically, let's say to grow it from 10 to 20 to 30%. And we believe there's a tipping point factor in promoting a peaceful ideology in the society. So our main goal is in those countries that have peace. So right now it's UAE, which is really quite peaceful. Bahrain, which is peaceful, but very few people support that peace with Israel. And Morocco, which is more the case. We want to deepen the accords. We want to deepen the public understanding of the Abraham Accords, of its benefits, and of peace with Israel. In Israel, of course, we also work to have people appreciate that the Arab world or the Muslim world is very nuanced and individualized, and not just one block that they can just say the Arab world. And secondly, where there is not peace agreements yet, we are working on a grassroots level to push to help warm up the conditions so that the governments can feel more and more comfortable moving in that direction. And so ideally, we would love to see a situation, first of all, politically beyond our control, where Saudi Arabia joins this accord. And immediately with Saudi Arabia, I think 2 or 3 or 4 countries could easily sign peace agreements or begin processes with Israel. And we want to be the first actor on the ground, and that it's easier for the countries that are allied with Saudi Arabia to do so after Saudi Arabia gives the green light, so to speak. But I agree with you. I agree with you. The idea and the hope is that it comes from the country itself, and not as some kind of package deal. And so that's our goal. Our goal is in the countries where there is peace to deepen, to connect with more and more people, to help truly normalize that concept of peace with Israel. Where there is not yet peace, to help build growing movement of serious people who are publicly willing, where it's safe, obviously, publicly willing to engage in the issue, and where it's not safe, maybe less publicly. We do a lot of work in the West to try to change the discourse in the direction of what we've been talking about. So to be pro-Israel doesn't mean anti-Palestinian. To be pro-Palestinian doesn't mean to be anti-Israel. We're trying to change that narrative. And lately, we've also started working on incorporating rising Palestinian leaders in what we're trying to do. It's not the heart of what we're trying to do. Our vision is regional and not local, but that's something we've also begun doing lately. And thank you for those warm words, and that warm endorsement. And what we do is truly from the heart. because we want to see a better region for all of us.
Thank you, Dan, for your time, and I hope we will see peace in future.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me on your show.